Okay, hey everyone, buckle up, curiously minded entrepreneurs, and welcome back to the Company Road podcast. And yeah, today, entrepreneurs, we're going to be unlocking the secret sauce behind one of the most powerful forces for change, I think, within organizations, which is the consultant's mindset. So often businesses spending huge amounts of money on bringing consultants in, or lesser amounts maybe these days. But yeah, it'll be interesting to unpack it today. Incredibly excited to introduce Steph Foxworthy, who is a true powerhouse with over 25 years of experience, spanning customer experience, digital strategy, product, innovation, sales, marketing, and the whole shebang. So Steph was managing director at Accenture Song here in Melbourne until just recently. And yeah, from massive enterprise overhauls for giants like Coles and Telstra, to delivering high impact digital experiences for non-profits, Steph has driven results for a number of organizations here. So it's going to be super interesting to get his perspective on this topic. And yeah, if you ever wondered what makes consultants so successful at bringing about change within incredibly complex and difficult organizations, then this is the episode for you. So yeah, we're going to talk a bit about the consultant's mindset for us. We'll talk about how it kind of differs from a traditional employee's perspective a little bit, and some of the key skills and traits that entrepreneurs can immediately benefit from. And we'll get into some specific lessons for entrepreneurs on how to apply consulting techniques to drive innovation and impact within your own company, really. So let's jump in. So Steph, a very warm welcome to the show on a cold Melbourne day that's getting a little bit warmer, but thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
All right. And yeah, Steph, maybe just talk us through a bit about your background and your experience in management consulting, the things you've been doing, if you want to start us there.
Yeah, sure. So when I was younger, I thought I wanted to be an architect. So I was studying design and studied interior design at university. And my first kind of jobs out of university were in digital and graphic design. So that was the early days of desktop publishing and multimedia, as it was called back then. So I started getting into how technology was impacting design practice, and that kind of evolved into the internet as that started to become a thing. So I was around the birth of the internet, so I could see the kind of impact that technology was going to have on the way business was done. So I started a digital agency with a friend of mine a long time ago, and left that to go traveling with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. Ended up in London and worked in e-commerce over there, helping 3Mobile set up their e-commerce business. I was there for 5 or 6 years, and then came back here and worked in digital agencies. And over that time, the kind of power of technology and the internet was overwhelming. Everything was suddenly becoming digitized. My work was evolving from design and making things to more strategic conversations around what the future holds, what the impact would be, how businesses could kind of organize themselves to take advantage of that. And so my work became more as a strategy director. I was strategy director at Reactive for a number of years. Reactive was acquired by Accenture about 9 years ago, 10 years ago now. And I moved into the kind of management consulting world, which was a bit of a culture shock, going from a small independent digital agency where we could kind of make decisions on a dime and do the sorts of work at a relatively small scale. I mean, we were a pretty large organization when we were acquired, but still the kind of work was mid-tier kind of market focused, to moving into a global behemoth like Accenture, 700,000 people around the world. That was a pretty big culture shock, but at the same time, the level of access and influence in terms of business decision makers and the scale of the work that was being delivered there was hugely exciting. So for my role, a strategist and a consultant with a design mindset, that was pretty exciting. So I stuck around at Accenture for quite some time, and then just recently I've kind of made the shift out of management consulting and into running a services practice within a social enterprise. So at our community, and working with not-for-profits and grant making and funding organisations. So that's been a really interesting shift as well. So leading the kind of services team at our community, which is, exciting change and a bit of a change of pace.
Yeah, very good. And probably much needed after all of that,
yeah.
I should say.
Yeah, that's right. The consulting lifestyle is pretty fast paced, that's right.
Yeah, maybe it has a shelf life. I don't know. Some people go on and on, but it's a hard one.
There's a lot of lifers in those businesses, yeah.
That's it. I don't know how they do it. Yeah, I mean, that transition as you made from Reactive and into Accenture, it sounded like it was a little bit of a shift in gear. How would you describe some of your observations of how that worked operationally? Was there a different mindset? Were you thinking that, okay, there's a different way of working here? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there are some pretty stark differences between the kind of employee mindset, the agency mindset, and then the consulting mindset. So,
Yeah, okay.
and I feel like there's levels of kind of pattern recognition that go with each of those things. So, as an employee or with your audience focus around intrapreneurship, there's levels of control that you have around the final outcome of a program, a project, or the work that you're doing. You're involved in the shaping of it, the delivery of it from end to end. You're kind of accountable for the outcomes, you're accountable for the teams who are delivering that work. So that aspect of control, responsibility and accountability is very high for the people within the organisations.
Yeah.
In an agency life mindset, you're more focused on project delivery. You're kind of time boxed in an engagement typically. So usually there's capability that the organisation doesn't have, or there's types of output that they're not able to produce themselves, perhaps.
Yeah.
So you tend to get brought in to work on a project. It has a defined lifespan. There's expected deliverables at the end.
Yeah.
And you kind of do your work, hand it over, hopefully have a celebration at the end and move on. The consultant mindset, I think, is slightly different. The consultant mindset is built much more on trust around expertise in a particular domain. And good consulting organisations are kind of brought in again and again to help people work through bigger problems. And very often it's about having a vision for the future around where the market's going, where the world's going, where customers are going, having a point of view around what that future looks like and how it's going to impact the organisation. So in my experience, that those kind of relationships tend to be less time boxed. They tend to be more kind of continuous, and that people will come back to you and seek your input into where that is going in a more strategic way or in more of an influencing way. You have less of a specific focus on delivery and outcome in a project sense, and more of a guiding role in helping people kind of navigate change in technology or in strategy or in business structure. And so the level of trust and relationship you need to build with clients becomes a little bit more elevated. I mean, of course, trust and influence is consistent across all of those different mindsets, whether you're internal, whether you're doing things on a project basis, or whether you're providing advisory services. But in the consulting side of things, that level of trust and influence is really super important.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask the golden question is, how do consultants get work? If it's obviously built on trust, but if it's not built around an outcome all the time, then how does that work, do you think?
I think the level of expertise that needs to be developed by consultants is pretty high. You need to have a track record of delivery in certain contexts. You need to have proven that you've had a positive influence on other businesses and the ability to kind of draw on that. Word of mouth is critical in this. People move between jobs, between industries and between companies, and good consultants get carried along. People work with somebody, they grow to trust them, and they call them up in their next role when they have a similar problem. I do feel like that level of expertise becomes something that people will draw on again and again. So when you've demonstrated that you understand a problem or a problem space, that you have a clear vision for where things are going, and you're able to articulate that and share that with people and help them reorient themselves towards where growth might be or where opportunity might lie, that becomes something that kind of carries along with you. But but it's very much relationship based. So it's pretty hard to convince somebody that you know what you're talking about if they've never seen or heard of you before from a consulting perspective. You really need to demonstrate your credentials, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you were talking a bit about the internet, and then obviously we jump forward and we've got AI options pouring out of it. Every meeting, every interaction, and it's definitely a culture now of people assuming or quickly getting to the point where they feel like they're an expert in most things, right? So they can find solutions to things very quickly. So how do you think that is changing, and does that redefine the role for a consultant?
I think it really does. I've spent the last year really immersing myself in AI, and particularly in generative AI. Because I have exactly the same feeling I had at the beginning of my career. So when I first started looking into the internet and started thinking about the implications that a connected digital world has on business and life, this light bulb went off for me. I was like, this is going to change everything. It's going to change the way that people do everything in their lives. And so myself and a good friend who were working in a multimedia agency, we launched our own business to start working in internet.
Yeah.
And that wave has just built and built, and it's carried me along my whole career. And we started paddling very hard to kind of catch that wave. But once the wave was there, it was a really not a difficult thing to keep riding that wave. Net and digital transformation and technology in general has been hugely impactful in business and been great for my career and improved the lives of many people all around the world. I have exactly the same sense right now with AI. So I fundamentally feel like the way that AI is merging now is going to change our relationship with technology, the way that AI interprets kind of natural language into instructions, the way that it works to generate output like code or imagery or music or whatever the output format is. The way that people are engaging with technology changes fundamentally. And access to information changes fundamentally. So what I was talking about earlier about expertise, suddenly if information is available, delivered by these technology solutions in really deep, valuable ways, so summarizing information, summarizing content, that sort of stuff in the background, then I feel like that kind of interaction with technology becomes much more valuable.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking a bit about employees, agencies, and consulting differences just before. And to put it brutally and maybe overly simply, but if there's like a tick, a cross, or a question mark over some of those things in relation to AI and what the future of anyone's remit might end up being, it feels like as an employee, there's always going to be a role for facilitating something through an organization. That there would be, in the consulting sense, that might be a question mark because there would be deliverables that could be generated more easily than perhaps before. And then consulting, maybe another question mark. What's your thinking? What do you think is going to be the future?
Yeah, I feel like there's that level of accountability for delivering the outcome through to completion is kind of the crux of the challenge that faces consultants going forward. And to be fair, it always has been. The cost of bringing in external people to lead programs has always been a challenge for organisations.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to deliver the final outcome, if your role is to define the problem space, design a solution, influence the organisation to be able to achieve that outcome on their own behalf, it's always been the critique of strategy practices that you come in and there's the old saying, you borrow someone's watch to tell them the time. Yeah. That's the way people have often kind of characterised consultants. But, if you don't know how to read a watch, then you do need somebody to tell you what the time is. And so I think the way that we're looking at internal strategy practices, being able to gain access to the sum total of human knowledge in these kind of AI-driven environments, it does change the role of how consultants approach some of this work. And I feel like that bringing the outcome forward, helping the organisation change so that they can start to bring results into the world is where consulting is going to need to go. It's going to need to be more enabling than kind of directive. And I feel like that is a bit of a change.
Yeah, so delivery and implementation focus, but more around enablement and empowerment and upskilling and that kind of area.
I feel like the democratisation of technology and tools with the kind of rise of new software platforms, this whole kind of AI-generated world where software becomes a bit more accessible, where less specific kind of code expertise might be required, more kind of describing the problem to an AI-powered solution.
Yeah,
that becomes more important. Consultants have always been really good at asking the right questions. You often hear people kind of critiquing consultants that they come into an organisation and they ask a bunch of dumb questions. But because you're an external, because you're an outsider, you can get away with asking a bunch of dumb questions until you get to the question that they can't answer. So you can sit there saying, I need you to talk me through these processes or this approach, and ask question after question, and people will look at you like you're an idiot. Like, why are you asking me these basic questions? We've been doing this for decades. We're obviously top of our game as a business. You've come in as an outsider and you're asking me really basic, simple questions. And they'll answer them and they'll answer them and they'll look at you like you're an idiot. And then you get a few days into an engagement and you start asking some questions, and then they start going, ooh, haven't thought about that, didn't consider that, or I don't know the answer to that. And then that's where the gold lies. And I feel like as an external party, you have permission to do that. In fact, that's your job. As an internal, if you start asking dumb questions or questioning the status quo, or there's a lot of vulnerability to kind of admit you don't know something within an organization, particularly at senior levels. And that's something that I feel like consultants are very good at. But there's approaches with technology now that are going to allow people to start asking those questions or delving a bit under the cover of their own organizations. So that does make the consultants a bit more at risk, I suppose.
Yeah. The AI tools are getting quite good at asking questions back, right, too. So you can often find that it helps steer you to, like a consultant would, is helping steer you to an answer in the way that you might have thought it would appear. Yeah,
exactly. The prompting side of things, I think, is super important in this new AI world. And that is all about asking the right questions. So, yeah, the people who can formulate the right question, who can kind of see the pattern, see the system, and know what questions to ask, they're the people who are going to shine in this new world. If you're committed or married to a process, that's going to be much harder.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, question asking, I mean, how does that get taught or learned, do you think? Where do people find that skill? Is it taught? Is it learned? How do you best find out about how to do that better?
Yeah, I think consulting is a team game. And so people will learn from observing other people leading practices like this. And the questions that people are asking and the levels of vulnerability they show in terms of asking basic questions and working their way through a problem, I think that's always instructive. I think one of the things that will be a challenge going forward is the size of consulting practices are shrinking around the world. So lots of organisations are promising that they're going to use more technology, they're going to use more AI. There is downward pressure on the size and shape of consulting practices. I was talking to a client the other day who runs a finance business, and they were saying that they can see that their pathway, their pipeline for getting people through their business is going to change enormously. People who would previously come in and do process type work, so bookkeeping and tax filing and those kinds of roles where people learn their craft before they can become advisors and before they can start to be creative in the way that they solve client problems, they really need to know the basics. Most of those kind of process-driven roles are going to be automated, and this client's view was that in the next 5 or so years, those sorts of roles will be completely automated by software systems. And so he was asking, where is he going to find his advisory talent? Like, where is he going to need to look to bring people through his business so that they are expert and able to provide creative and complex solutions if the basics work is all automated away? And he was kind of talking about a bit of a apprenticeship type model. Maybe we get back to this way where people are kind of anointed to join these sorts of practices and brought in. But work your way up, learn your craft to get to a point where you have enough experience. Perhaps those kind of pathways are going to be a bit broken by AI and technology in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting point and puts a big question mark in itself around the hierarchy, the longevity of careers, the engagement around it, and the education system that's feeding the working world, right? So,
that's right.
Teaching people how to think, how to inquire, how to have a curious mind. If you're not doing that through work, then how is it being learned, or is it not being learned? That presents a big question.
Yeah, I think that is a really huge question around educational pathways. I feel like my own kind of career grew from a design background, and I think design education is great at teaching that sort of inquiry, beginning with research, beginning with insight and observation, assessing data, looking for kind of patterns in amongst all of that stuff, but approaching it with a creative mindset. That's kind of the heart of design inquiry, and I feel like that's critical to all of the sense making that needs to happen in the world around advisory services and consulting as well. I think consulting has had a big role to play in terms of kind of cookie cutter expertise as well. People have seen one problem somewhere and applied the same solution in other areas. And so part of what consulting offers is that kind of lookalike opportunity within an industry.
Yeah.
And that can be great for things like effectiveness and efficiency, for cost reduction and benchmarking, but it's not necessarily a great approach for things like differentiation and growth. So if you're really trying to kind of be an organization that's more customer centric, that's trying to differentiate in a market, then you need more of that creative kind of design-led thinking as opposed to benchmarking and evidence. So designers are kind of designing future value.
Yeah.
And sometimes that future value is hard to quantify. Sometimes it needs to be hypothesis-based and driven through experimentation. And there's many organizations where the culture doesn't really support that. And so if you are really looking to kind of define growth and new opportunities and taking a design-led and a hypothesis-led approach to that, you need to have a culture that's much more experimental to allow you to kind of pursue that avenue.
Yeah, and the learning pathways would need to gear you up for that. I feel like coming over here, the learning pathways seem quite vocationally orientated in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So in Europe, particularly in the UK anyway, you may have gathered this from while you're over there, but people will come into a role with an arts degree, and I did an arts degree, but over here that would be kind of questioned in itself. They'd be scoffed a little bit. Why are you doing something that isn't business as a degree if you're not, that kind of thing? But actually the teaching of the thinking process was what was really valuable from that. Critical thinking, lateral thinking, it could be anything. It could be design, as you were saying, it could be maths, it could be science. You're learning how to question through that process as well. So I feel like maybe some of those learning pathways will become more important over here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree 100%. A traditional education in the arts or in design or in other more creative areas does help people have a broader base for future inquiry, perhaps, than some of the vocational pathways. I feel like that's potentially going to be more valuable in the future. The idea of kind of learning your craft in some of these more kind of high value careers, that's going to be a bit kind of carved out by technology. So the guy I was speaking to who runs a finance business, he can see that traditional kind of accounting pathway is just going to disappear for future generations. Similarly, in high value roles like legal profession, the paralegal or the young kind of lawyer pathway where you're working your way through a legal firm, that a lot of that work is going to be automated away. So yeah, where people start to look for that education, I think it does come down to better ways of approaching critical thinking, looking at alternative ways of framing a problem, looking for critique, so collaboration and diversity of thought. Those sorts of things become more valuable into the future. Yeah.
And maybe some of the social sciences and research and some of the data-driven work, actually understanding it, how to analyze, how to report, that kind of thing. Yeah. Because you've got to be able to interpret it. And without a critical eye on a lot of the information that you see on your web browser or on your phone every day, you're thinking, okay, well, if this is the truth, is it the truth?
Yeah.
Should I be questioning this further? Is it going to be right? Is it going to be good enough? It's sort of in the eye of the beholder a little bit as to whether your AI response is any good or not. So.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's kind of opening up for us in a more technology-driven, AI-enabled world is that the level of confidence that you have around decisions potentially doesn't need to be as high within organizations. Traditionally, the cost of execution of a business change has been such a barrier to making changes to either a product set or a business process that the level of confidence that leadership needs in order to execute that needs to be extraordinarily high. So there's a lot of work that was done historically around strategy planning, around research and business modeling, data-driven analysis and benchmarking across industry, a lot of more backwards-looking analysis of data to build that confidence that would allow organisations to invest in change. What I foresee happening is that the cost of change, particularly around technology, starts to come down in more of an AI-driven world. And so the ability to experiment with different product models, with different service models, becomes much higher. And the kind of granular nature of how you go to market with a product or a service becomes more of a kit of parts and a bit of a puzzle where you kind of stitch things together in the moment and per client need, rather than manufacturing one massive product and putting it to market and saying take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Some of the conversations I've been having with some of my clients recently are kind of instructive about this. One example was some guy in the States put together a voice bot that he deployed on his energy company and sent it out into the world and got it to try and renegotiate his energy bill. And it was a voice agent, so it called up on the telephone, it spoke to a service agent, it tried to renegotiate his bill. They got very confused about what was going on, asked whether it was a digital assistant, and it disclosed that it was a digital assistant, and they said, well, I can't negotiate with you then, and hung up. But it called back hundreds of times before somebody, some administrator somewhere, it was escalated to and made some change that he was happy with.
Yeah.
And that kind of nature of how problems are going to be solved in the future, if you have a little agent that is able to go off and negotiate with a business at a very granular level and is completely tireless, it fundamentally changes the way that businesses need to deliver their services. You need to atomize your product into the smallest bit you can negotiate on, and you need to be prepared for these tireless agents that are going to come and whittle away your margins wherever they are. And very few businesses are prepared for that kind of future where they have digital agents negotiating with them one way or another on every aspect of their product or service. So that kind of experimental approach to the market and your products and your services, I think that's going to become a much bigger thing. Yeah, so it fundamentally changes the way businesses organise themselves to deliver.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's frightening, isn't it? I think the art of sales and the kind of the soft sell, the hard sell, the nuance, the human relation, the relational side to business is kind of being whittled down, it feels like, a little bit there. But you're just going to get hounded by some robot. Maybe the catchphrase it won't be so much, we won't negotiate with terrorists, but we won't negotiate with robots.
Yeah.
Like there's going to need to be some
something in that,
that,
I think.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, there are some people that are standing up to that and they're saying, okay, there's AI, but to Andrew Griffiths, who's an author here, and he's based in Tasmania, and he's talking about human intelligence a lot in some of his social content. And there's definitely a bit of a rebellion against AI in some cases, but from an intrapreneur's point of view and the skills and traits that we've been talking about, would you be saying lean in or lean out or do a bit of both, or what would your advice be there?
Yeah, I'm a lean-in guy.
Yeah.
I feel like, as I said, the relationship with technology is fundamentally changing. Yeah. And this kind of natural... If you think about AI as a new keyboard or a new mouse, it's just a new way to get information into a computer and get the computer to respond to your needs.
Yeah.
I feel like that's where things are going. And the tools available to us in the future will be even better at allowing us to get outputs that meet our needs. And just the way you ask for that output is going to be the skill that people are developing. So, yeah, that ability to kind of be able to engage with technology in a way that gives you what you want, I think that's the skill that people will be learning in the future. Over the last couple of years, we've talked about it as prompt engineering, as if it's a career. I don't think it is a career. I think it's a way of engaging with technology more broadly. I think that's the sort of thing that people will be being taught more. Yeah, your point about critical thinking and lateral thinking, I think that's going to become more important, because understanding the problem space, asking the right questions and framing them in ways that try to avoid bias and preconceived ideas, I feel like that's where consulting practices are going to go in general, but also if you're an entrepreneur or you're somebody trying to have a creative approach to solving problems within an organisation, those skills are going to be critical.
Yeah, but you need to know how to apply it and what to ask of it. It's kind of like if there's a Michelin star chef in your house and they were going to cook dinner tonight, but you had no idea what kind of food they could make and you had no ideas for what they could cook, then you'd have to work it out in some way and prompt the right outcome for it to be like the most amazing meal you ever had. You're having to design it yourself effectively. So people need to learn that.
One thing that's emerging at the moment that I've seen people doing quite a lot, particularly on the AI front, is asking the AI what questions they should ask. And so when you think about these kind of consulting practices and learning from observing other people, the same applies to learning from technology. So if you're asking, what should I ask or what should I know before I step into this problem space, the speed to learning in this new world is going to be incredibly rapid. So your ability to find out what background reading you should do or summarize the kind of research that might be important, learn who are the kind of precedents and experts in the space. That sort of stuff now is at our fingertips. Yeah. And I think that makes a big difference to the way people start to think about problem solving as well. In the past, the effort you would have to put into research a particular problem space within an industry or dig up precedents or look for case studies or find out who are the experts, what research you should be drawing on.
Yeah,
that was intensive work in and of itself, and that work now might be a bit more available to us. So streamlining that kind of approach.
Yeah, for sure, of course, yeah. I mean, I was going to come back to as well. We were talking a bit about the consultant's mindset just before, and it felt like we got somewhere in kind of understanding the differences there, but maybe we can go into a little bit around how the skills that consultants have could be applied within an organization, or how entrepreneurs could benefit from those skills in some way as well. So not just AI, but there's definitely it's a service orientated mindset ultimately. I mean, it is advisory in itself, but there's a sense of partnership, there's a sense of collaboration, there's direction and leadership. And some of these skills or traits that could be essential to entrepreneurs. What do you think consultants could teach entrepreneurs in that sense?
Yeah, I think there are three things that are really valued in organizations from consultants. The first is consultants come without a legacy bias. The challenges, the roadblocks, the cultural norms within an organization, consultants are able to sidestep those. So are able to kind of come in and observe those with a bit of a neutral gaze. They're able to bring experience of how other organizations do it. And that's highly valued. And it's one of the reasons why consultants are often brought in, because organizations don't know what they don't know and they really want that outsider's perspective. That's harder to achieve as an employee or an entrepreneur, but you can research that and bring in the voice of outside and try and find examples of how others do it to inform that. The second thing that the consultants bring that's also highly valued, I think, is the pattern recognition. So one of the reasons why people bring in consultants is that they have experience of seeing how problems have been solved in multiple organizations. Yeah. And so they're kind of joining the dots, and that pattern matching is what people are after. They're looking for someone who can come in and say, I've seen this problem before. I have some approaches that might help you solve this. Sometimes that comes with shortcuts. Sometimes that comes with coaching of how to go work through the problem. Yeah. And organizations really value that. I think often people within organizations find it challenging to talk about what they've done elsewhere, and it comes with that insider bias. People have lived experience in all sorts of ways. Building a culture where that diversity is celebrated and people are able to contribute based on that sort of lived experience adds enormous value to internal teams. So that kind of culture needs to be nurtured and supported. And that's hugely important. And I think the third aspect, in my experience, that consultants are really good at, and one of the reasons why people step into a consulting career is because they're able to do this, is the storytelling and influence side of things, painting the vision of a positive future and influencing people in leadership and with control that this is the right step to take, that can be very difficult to achieve as an insider. People you're working with every day, you kind of get to know what they like and what they think and what they do. And it's very difficult to kind of affect change with people that you work with every day in terms of painting a positive future and giving someone a vision.
Yeah.
So sometimes having an outsider come in to kind of do that is a bit of a shortcut. But the other thing to reflect on is that a consultant is really there to make their clients look good. And so a good consultant is always working very closely with somebody with influence within the organization. And sometimes it's useful to have an outsider's voice that people can kind of listen to, that you've paid a lot of money for. And so sometimes the checkbook suggests that this person's voice is worth listening to. Yeah. But ultimately, somebody within the organisation needs to buy into the vision, and they need to kind of own the vision, and they need to deliver that vision. So it is a partnership, and I feel like sometimes organisations need that external voice for a bit of extra credibility, but ultimately the people within the organisation are the ones who are signing up for that storytelling. So I think entrepreneurs can really learn from outsiders in agencies, outsiders in consultancies, about how they present their ideas and how compelling they make that kind of vision for the future, how well supported it is with evidence or precedent or examples, case studies, and fundamentally how evidence-based it is in the end. Like, what sort of data are you using to showcase why this is a better decision than others? In my experience, consultants are very good at that. They come with a book of benchmarks and examples that they can draw on. Often that's through work that they've done themselves, but sometimes it's by doing market scans and research. Sometimes internal teams can be a bit less evidence-based or a bit less thorough in some of that storytelling. So I feel like there's a lot that internal teams can learn from just seeing how externals who are brought in to solve a particular problem, how they go about telling that story.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because the people that align well within the organisations to the consultants are often the entrepreneurs, and they're looking to trailblaze in some sort of way too. So they're there to observe in the situation, to understand the process and advocate for it within their organisation. And they probably pick up a lot of those traits through the process, don't you think?
Completely agree.
Yeah. There's another part which is also maybe slightly more relational, having made, and I think you did this as well, the transition from agency to consulting. It feels like in an agency world, and this applies within organisations as well, but in an agency world, there's definitely more of that, I guess, more directive management where clients might say, okay, this is what I want and can you go and make it? That would happen within an organisation too. But in a consulting world, it feels like the footing's a little bit more equal because you're partnering and you're not necessarily there just to provide a service, but you're there to be part of the business in some sort of way. So there's a distinction there in how you would handle yourself as an entrepreneur. In one case, you would be, yeah, I'll do that research and I'll write a report and I'll give it back to you and I'll provide you with a deliverable. In a consulting mindset, it might be more about questioning it, checking whether it's right, benchmarking it, as you were saying, bringing in your own knowledge base. And I feel like there's a nuance there, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I think my experience of agency life was very often that we were dealing with middle management as opposed to senior leadership or board leadership, and that there was a particular problem that was well understood that needed to be solved, that was more capability or capacity led. A client years ago say to me, I'd do this myself if I had the time and the team, but I don't, so I need you to do it. And his point was, I know what the problem is. I know how I want to solve this. I'm getting you to do it because I don't have the time or the bandwidth or the team to do this myself. And so his kind of coaching was, I'm going to tell you what I want. I'm going to tell you what I need, and I expect you to execute it. And I want you to do it efficiently. And it's a bit of a grudge purchase. If I didn't have to spend this money, I wouldn't.
Really? Yeah.
And that was a pretty instructive relationship kind of conversation. It's like, okay, I'm going to take instructions from this guy. I'm going to add advice where I can, where I think I add value. But fundamentally, he's not looking for us to question his decisions. He's looking for us to execute on a program.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That expectation was quite clear, and we did it, and it went very well, and we worked together for many years. But that relationship was a bit more transactional. Whereas there are other clients who I've sat down with, and they were brutally honest and said they had no idea how they were going to tackle this problem. We were going to have to work through it together.
Yeah.
And it was going to need to be much more creative, and it was going to need to be much more collaborative. And we were going to explore multiple potential futures that this could be. And those, for me personally, those kind of conversations are much more energizing.
Yeah.
I'm an ideas person and I'm a strategic person, and I like to kind of have multiple options in front of me, and I like to think I can kind of follow the bouncing ball through those kind of problem spaces and add value that way. But yeah, I think you're right that there is a kind of an influencing and conceptual difference between what you're being asked for as a execution partner and what you're being asked for as a strategic or a consulting partner.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think an entrepreneur could identify, in a sense, which role to play in which situation if they were working within an organisation?
Yeah, I think the questions are pretty similar. Being given a directive by senior leadership and the problem space seems to be well defined, and the hypothesis of what the future holds and where the value is very clear, then you are probably falling into execution mode. But if you can observe that the way that the problem has been framed seems a bit naive, or it seems like it's kind of rushing at the solution, that not every opportunity has been explored, then you could probably put on your consulting mindset and say, well, hang on a minute, have we considered alternatives? Do we have other options ahead of us? I think that is very, like you say, it's very relational. It's how you relate with leadership and with your management to be able to kind of achieve that. Is it time boxed? Is it time pressured? Is there a result that is required in short order? Often they're the sorts of things that drive that kind of directive behaviour, whereas the more experimental, more exploratory mindset sometimes needs a bit more patience, a bit more vision around it. And so the strategy there can be a bit more emergent rather than directive.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think sometimes if you're asking a very open question in a more pointed context where people just want to move through the meeting and get to the answer, you've almost got to give a bit of rationale, a bit of context as to why you're stopping the train in its tracks at that point. Because otherwise people are just like, what is this person talking about? And that's a complete distraction from what we're here to do. So you've got to know your audience a little bit.
Yeah.
What I mean, we're coming to the close now, but maybe just I've got to ask you this question about hard lessons learned, and from a relational point of view, is there anything in that area that you want to share either as a story or as a learning around what not to do in a relational sense within an organisation?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've observed a lot, and coming from a design background where the process is highly valued, we need to start with research, and we need to speak to customers, and we need to synthesize, and we need to create opportunities, and we need to do our double diamond, and we need to explore all of these opportunities. And if any of those steps are shortcut or undervalued, designers can feel very frustrated about being forced to deliver something without having gone through all the steps.
Yeah.
I feel like whilst that process does deliver value from end to end, being able to be adaptable around that and recognize that sometimes there is levels of knowledge or levels of expertise within your organization or within other people or within teams that you may not understand.
Yeah.
I feel like that is a bit of a pitfall for creative people and entrepreneurs inside organizations. You have a particular way you want to approach a problem, and you may have found value in doing that many times before. But when you start to try and execute that within an organization, sometimes it may not be appropriate, and you might need to pivot and change and be a bit more comfortable in ambiguity and uncertainty. Sometimes the experience that other people have that you may not have had yourself can shortcut you to a good answer. I've seen a lot of people kind of stick rigidly to a process that I can see as an outsider, or I can see through the work that I've been doing is frustrating stakeholders and not building a great relationship. So I feel like that kind of reading the room, knowing when you need to be able to defend your process and when you need to be able to move on, that comes through learned experience and delivery scars, I think. So it's not easy to understand when that's going off the rails if you don't have the experience of having seen it happen again and again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel like there's a lot of ability to enforce a process when adaptability is sometimes a bit more valuable. And that can be something to think about if you're trying to work through and you're starting to see, you getting pushback or some people are not really valuing the way you're tackling a problem. You might need to think a bit more creatively about how you approach the problem.
Definitely. I think you got to know when to go all out and put a bit of drama and a bit of theatre around it. You wouldn't labour it, but you can over-labour some of the points that you're trying to make as a consultant. When people don't really want to hear it, you just want to be venting. That's something that you learn over time, obviously, not to do that.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, actually, that as a consultant, you're very often a therapist, that you will hear the negativity and the frustration, and when people are kind of telling you about the barriers they face, it is a bit of a therapeutic relationship. And what they're really asking you to do is to play that back to leadership and to decision makers, to showcase that people want to do a better job and they want to deliver a better outcome, but they're kind of held back by their own organisations. As a consultant, I feel like you often get those sorts of conversations where you're able to diagnose process problems or relationship problems or some issue that the organisation wants changed and fixed. That's much harder to surface when you're an insider, but the same toolkit applies. So if you can kind of get the voice of the end user captured in a way, play that back, show that it adds time and cost and delay, then that's equally valuable from insiders as it is from consultants. I sometimes think people are more open with consultants sometimes because they've got less to lose.
And I've seen this happen within meetings, within workshops. People are trying to shine a light on the situation within the organisation, but it's almost misinterpreted. Sometimes it feels like some people within the room think there's some agenda at play, and they're just saying it to protect their own team or their own interests, or that sort of thing comes in a little bit. So the consultant is there to kind of give the neutral, impartial view. But it's a hard one, I think, for entrepreneurs to navigate in that sense, because
the politics is much harder to navigate as an insider sometimes. You can be a neutral kind of third party as an external consultant. You can enforce that kind of anonymity around feedback and frame it as a problem to be solved as opposed to a relationship that needs to be fixed. Those sorts of things are a bit of an advantage sometimes as an outsider.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Steph. Really enjoyed the chat today. I've had a lot of good chats around exploring the role of consultants, the consultant's mindset, what we can learn from consultants and how consultants do what they do in some respects. Anyway, so we could spend a lot more time talking about that as we're both consultants. But one takeout for me is that I think consultants make good conversation around these things. We ask each other questions and we have a curious mindset. So yeah, really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate you coming onto the show as well. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. It's great.